Ladies and gentlemen, we are now 36 hours away from the single largest wave of commercial real estate loan maturities in American history. My name is Alexander Cross, and what I am about to share with you is not speculation. This is not fear-mongering. This is mathematical certainty playing out in real time across three of America's most iconic cities. Right now, as I speak to you on this Sunday morning in January 2026, the skyscrapers of San Francisco, New York City, and Chicago are standing as hollow monuments to a collapsing empire. These are not cities anymore. They are financial crime scenes, and the evidence is irrefutable. We are witnessing the final countdown to what I call the Great Urban Fracture. This is the moment when the fantasy price of American commercial real estate finally collides with the brutal mathematics of reality. For 3 years, banks have been playing a game called extend and pretend. They extend loan maturities. They pretend buildings are worth what they paid for them. They pretend tenants will return. They pretend downtown will recover. That game ends this week. The debt maturity wall is here. $1.5 trillion in commercial real estate loans are coming due by the end of 2026. That is not $1.5 billion. That is $1.5 trillion. Let me say this 3 different ways so you understand the magnitude. $1,500 billion of debt. $1,500 million. A debt pile so massive it exceeds the entire gross domestic product of Canada. And here is what nobody is telling you. This debt cannot be refinanced. It cannot be rolled over. It cannot be extended again. The banks have reached their limit. The borrowers have reached their breaking point. And the buildings, those beautiful glass towers that once symbolized American economic dominance, are worth 30 to 50% less than the outstanding loan balances. This is not a correction. This is not a market cycle. This is a structural collapse of the urban commercial real estate model. And it is happening right now in 3 cities that represent the fracture points of this earthquake. Let me walk you through the 3 tiers of urban death that we are observing. Each city represents a different phase of the same terminal disease. San Francisco is the canary in the coal mine. This city entered cardiac arrest first, and its vital signs are now flatline. As of the first quarter of 2025, downtown San Francisco's office vacancy rate stands at 33.9%. Think about that number. 1/3 of all office space in the financial district sits completely empty. No tenants. No workers. No lights in the windows at night. But that is just the headline number, and headlines lie. When you segment the market by building quality, the real horror emerges. Class 4 and Class 5-star office buildings, the premium towers that were supposed to be immune to downturn, are sitting at 27.2% vacancy. These are not old warehouse conversions. These are trophy assets, state-of-the-art construction, premium locations, and they are ghosted. Let me give you the total volume of this void. 50 million square feet of office space is available in San Francisco right now. To help you visualize this nightmare, that is equivalent to roughly 70 Empire State Buildings sitting empty. 70 iconic towers worth of vacant space in one metro area. And of that 50 million square feet, 9.3 million square feet is sublease space. That means companies are so desperate to escape their lease obligations that they are willing to pay someone else to take over their contracts. Now, let us do the mathematics of financial destruction. The average lease rate in downtown San Francisco before the pandemic was approximately $72 per square foot annually. Today, landlords are offering concessions, free rent periods, and tenant improvement allowances that effectively cut that rate to $35 to $40 per square foot. That is a 50% collapse in revenue. But the debt on these buildings was underwritten assuming $72 per square foot cash flow. So the debt service coverage ratio, the fundamental metric that determines whether a building can pay its mortgage, has collapsed by half. Here is what that means in plain English. If a building needs $10 million annually to service its debt, but it is only generating $5 million in rental income, the building is insolvent. It is mathematically bankrupt. The only reason it has not been foreclosed yet is because banks do not want to own empty office towers in a dead downtown. New York City is in phase 2. This is not full cardiac arrest yet. This is managed decline. The patient is on life support, and doctors are desperately trying experimental surgeries to keep vital signs stable. Manhattan's office vacancy rate as of August 2025 stood at approximately 14%. That sounds manageable compared to San Francisco's apocalypse, right? But here is what the 14% number hides. Manhattan has 416 million square feet of office inventory. 14% vacancy means roughly 58 million square feet is sitting empty. That is more total vacant space than San Francisco's entire problem, just hidden inside a much larger denominator. And New York has deployed a strategy that San Francisco cannot. Conversions. The city has launched an aggressive program to convert obsolete office towers into residential apartments. Since 2023, Manhattan's office supply has fallen nearly 2% as buildings like the old Pfizer headquarters, 753rd Avenue, and towers on Billionaires Row are being gutted and rebuilt as apartments. Let me walk you through one specific case to show you the financial gymnastics required to make this work. The former Pfizer headquarters near Grand Central Terminal is being converted into 1,600 rental apartments. This is a 35-story tower built in the mid-20th century. The cost to convert office to residential in Manhattan runs approximately $400 to $500 per square foot. If we assume this building has roughly 1 million square feet of space, that is a $400 to $500 million conversion cost. Plus, the developer had to acquire the building, which likely traded at a distressed price of maybe $200 million given its obsolete office condition. Total basis, $600 to $700 million. Now, what is the revenue model? 1,600 apartments at an average rent of $3,500 per month equals $5.6 million monthly, or $67 million annually. Subtract operating expenses of roughly 30%, and you have net operating income of $47 million per year. At a 5% cap rate, that values the converted building at $940 million. So the developer is effectively creating $200 to $300 million in value by performing this radical surgery. But here is the catch. Only Class B and Class C office buildings can be converted. The floor plates, the window lines, the core layouts have to work for residential. Trophy towers with deep floor plates and central cores cannot be converted. So New York is cannibalizing its weakest buildings to reduce supply and stabilize the survivors. This is managed decline. This is triage, and it only works if demand for apartments remains strong. Chicago is phase 3. This is not just vacancy and conversion. This is full corporate exodus. This is the moment when the biggest employers, the anchor tenants that justified downtown's entire existence, publicly announce they are leaving. In October 2025, Walgreens, one of Illinois' most iconic companies, announced it is abandoning its downtown Chicago headquarters. At its peak, that office housed 1,800 employees. Walgreens was founded on Chicago's South Side in 1901. This is a 124-year-old company that embodied Illinois pride, and it just declared that downtown Chicago is no longer viable. Walgreens is not alone. Boeing, Caterpillar, Tyson Foods, and Citadel have all fled Chicago or Illinois entirely in the past 2 years. Citadel moved to Miami. Boeing moved to Virginia. Caterpillar moved to Texas. Each move removes thousands of high-paying jobs from the downtown tax base. Each move eliminates demand for office space, for restaurants, for retail, for hotels. And why are they leaving? Crime. Chicago's murder rate is 5 times higher than New York's and 3 times higher than Los Angeles. That is not a perception problem. That is not media bias. That is FBI uniform crime reporting data. Downtown retailers have boarded up windows. They have hired private security. They have shortened store hours. Small businesses cannot survive. Large corporations will not stay. The result is a death spiral. Corporations leave, which increases vacancy, which reduces foot traffic, which kills retail, which increases crime, which drives more corporations to leave. This is the terminal phase of urban collapse, and Chicago is leading the nation into this abyss. Now let me connect the dots between empty buildings and financial Armageddon, because vacancy is just the symptom. The disease is debt. By the end of 2026, $1.5 trillion in commercial real estate loans will mature. That is debt that must be paid off or refinanced within the next 12 months. And the overwhelming majority of this debt is secured by office buildings in major cities. Buildings that are now worth a fraction of their original valuations. Let me break down the scale of this maturity bomb. In the commercial mortgage-backed securities market alone, CMBS maturities total $174 billion in 2025 and another $92 billion in 2026. That is $266 billion of securitized debt coming due in 2 years. And office loans are the most exposed asset class within CMBS. Up to 17% of all CMBS office loans are in some stage of distress, delinquency, or default. Now, let us talk about what 17% delinquency actually means. As of October 2025, the office CMBS delinquency rate hit a record 11.8%. That is higher than the peak of the 2008 financial crisis. Let me repeat that because it is critical. The current office loan delinquency rate is worse than the great financial crisis meltdown, and we have not even hit the peak of maturities yet. Let me walk you through the mechanics of how this debt bomb explodes. Imagine you're a building owner in San Francisco. You own a Class A office tower worth $200 million when you bought it in 2019. You financed it with a $140 million mortgage at 4% interest. That loan matures in February 2026. You need to refinance. But here is your problem. Your building was 95% occupied in 2019. Today, it is 60% occupied because your anchor tenant, a tech company, downsized by half and another tenant went fully remote. Your rental income has dropped from $14 million annually to $9 million. And prevailing cap rates for office buildings have increased from 5% to 8% because investors now view office as high risk. So what is your building worth today? $9 million in net operating income divided by an 8% cap rate equals $112.5 million. Your building lost 44% of its value, but you still owe $140 million on the mortgage. You are $27.5 million underwater. No bank will refinance a loan where the collateral is worth less than the debt. So you have 3 options. Option A, you inject $27.5 million of your own cash to pay down the loan and refinance the remaining $112.5 million balance. But you're not going to do that because throwing good money after bad into a dying asset is financial suicide. Option B, you try to extend the loan maturity and beg the bank to give you another year or 2, hoping the market recovers. But banks have been playing extend and pretend for 3 years already. They have reached their regulatory limit. They cannot keep extending loans that are clearly impaired without taking write-downs on their balance sheets. Option C, you walk away. You stop making debt service payments. You let the building go into default. You hand the keys to the bank and declare bankruptcy. This is what we call strategic default, and it is about to happen on a massive scale across all 3 cities. When buildings start defaulting en masse, the banks that hold these loans face catastrophic losses. They foreclose on the property, but they cannot sell it because there are no buyers at current debt levels. So the bank becomes the owner of a money-losing office tower in a dead downtown. The bank has to mark the loan down to the building's true market value, which creates a loss on the bank's balance sheet. If enough losses accumulate, the bank's capital ratios fall below regulatory minimums. And that is when the Federal Reserve steps in with emergency liquidity. Which brings me to the invisible bailout that is already underway. The most important story in American finance right now is the story that is not being reported. It is the story of the silent bailout. The Federal Reserve is quietly injecting billions of dollars of emergency liquidity into the banking system to prevent a commercial real estate crisis from becoming a banking crisis. You will not see this on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. You will not hear Jerome Powell talk about it in press conferences. But it is happening. And the evidence is in the Fed's balance sheet data, which is published every week and ignored by almost everyone. Between December 2025 and January 2026, the Federal Reserve expanded its repo operations with primary dealers by approximately $8 billion. Repo operations are emergency lending facilities where banks can borrow cash overnight by posting collateral. And what collateral are banks posting? Commercial mortgage-backed securities. CMBS bonds backed by office buildings in San Francisco, New York, and Chicago. $8 billion in 2 months. That is $4 billion per month. That is $133 million per day. The Fed is essentially buying toxic commercial real estate debt from banks to keep them solvent while they figure out what to do with their underwater loan portfolios. Let me put this $8 billion figure in context. During the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed's emergency lending to banks peaked at roughly $50 billion through the term auction facility. We are not at $50 billion yet, but we are accelerating toward it. And the scariest part is that nobody is talking about it. The 2008 bailout was front-page news every day. The current bailout is happening in the shadows. Now let me tell you which banks are in the most danger. The largest holders of commercial real estate loans are regional banks and Japanese megabanks. JP Morgan, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo have significant office loan exposure, but they also have diversified revenue streams. They can absorb losses. Regional banks cannot. Banks like New York Community Bank, Valley National Bank, and Western Alliance Bank have concentrated exposure to office and multifamily properties in major metros. If office loan defaults accelerate, these banks face existential threats. And when regional banks start failing, we get contagion. Depositors panic. Bank runs start. And the Federal Reserve has to choose between letting banks fail or printing trillions of dollars to bail them out. The Fed will choose the bailout. They always do. But bailouts create inflation. And inflation destroys the purchasing power of every dollar you hold in cash, in savings accounts, in money market funds. This is the hidden tax of commercial real estate collapse. It is not just building owners and banks that lose. It is every American who holds dollars. Now let me show you the smoking gun evidence that banks are already in distress. JP Morgan increased its loan loss reserves by $400 million in the fourth quarter of 2025, specifically citing commercial real estate exposure. You do not reserve $400 million for a sunny day. You reserve because you know the storm is already hitting your portfolio. Citibank has been flooded with requests for physical loan workouts. That is bankers speak for borrowers calling and saying, "I cannot pay. Please restructure my loan." When workout requests spike, defaults are 6 to 12 months behind. And Citibank has reportedly increased its workout staff by 30% to handle the volume. They are preparing for an avalanche. Bank of America has extended loan maturity timelines from 2 days for simple refinances to 2 weeks for complex office deals. Why the delay? Because underwriters are struggling to justify valuations. They're trying to find comparable sales, but there are no comparable sales because nobody is buying distressed office buildings. So they stall. They delay. They hope something changes. But nothing will change. The buildings are obsolete. Remote work is permanent. Downtowns are dead. The timing of this liquidity drain is particularly ominous. We are at the start of the new year. Banks want to close their books clean. They want to go into 2026 with strong balance sheets. But instead, the Fed is injecting $8 billion of emergency cash just to keep the lights on. That tells you the panic is acute. It tells you the problem cannot wait. And it tells you the worst is still ahead. Now let me take you inside the buildings themselves and show you the human and operational reality behind these vacancy statistics. Because numbers on a page do not capture the visceral horror of walking through a dead downtown. I want you to imagine you are standing in the lobby of a 50-story office tower in downtown San Francisco at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. This is a Class A building. Marble floors, high ceilings, modern security turnstiles. In 2019, this lobby would have been packed with hundreds of workers streaming in, grabbing coffee, swiping badges, heading to elevators. Today, you count 12 people. 12. In a building designed to house 3,000 workers. The coffee shop in the lobby closed 8 months ago. The sandwich shop is gone. The building directory shows 32 floors, and 22 of them are listed as available for lease. That is 69% vacancy. You take the elevator to the 20th floor to visit one of the remaining tenants, a mid-sized law firm. The elevator is eerily quiet. No crowded cars. No wait times. You exit on 20 and walk down the hallway. Half the floor is dark. Literally dark. The lights are motion activated to save on electricity costs, and nobody is walking these halls, so the lights stay off. The law firm reception area looks normal, but the receptionist tells you they downsized from 80 lawyers to 35. They gave up 2 floors and consolidated into one. They negotiated a 50% rent reduction with the landlord because the landlord was desperate to keep any tenant at all. And even at half price, the firm is considering leaving entirely and going fully remote because their young associates refuse to commute downtown. They say it is unsafe. They say it is depressing. They say it is a ghost town. This is the vacancy death spiral in human terms. When occupancy drops below a critical threshold, somewhere around 60 to 70%, buildings enter a feedback loop of accelerating decline. Here is how it works step by step. Step 1. Anchor tenants leave or downsize, creating large blocks of vacant space. Step 2. Remaining tenants see the vacancy and question whether they should stay in a half-empty building. Perception of instability grows. Step 3. The landlord cuts operating expenses to preserve cash flow. This means reducing janitorial services, cutting back on lobby staffing, deferring maintenance on elevators and HVAC systems. Step 4. Building quality deteriorates. Remaining tenants notice. Their employees complain. Step 5. When leases come up for renewal, tenants leave for higher quality buildings or go remote. Vacancy increases. Step 6. Return to step 3 and repeat. This loop continues until the building reaches terminal vacancy, defined as below 40% occupancy, at which point the building becomes functionally obsolete. And here is the terrifying part. Once a building enters terminal vacancy, it almost never recovers. The only solutions are radical reinvention through conversion to residential or hotels or demolition. Both options cost tens of millions of dollars and require years of planning and construction. During that time, the building generates zero income but still carries property tax obligations, insurance costs, and minimum maintenance expenses. Let me give you a specific example from the data. The Bravern Office Commons in Bellevue, Washington, just outside Seattle, is a 750,000 square foot complex of 2 towers completed in 2010. It was fully leased by Microsoft for over a decade. In 2023, Microsoft announced it would not renew its lease. The company departed. Today, the building is 100% vacant. The mortgage on Bravern Office Commons is $304 million. The building generated approximately $28 million in annual rent when Microsoft was the tenant. That rent covered the mortgage payment and operating expenses with a small profit margin. Today, with 0 tenants, the building generates 0 revenue. It cannot pay its mortgage. In the spring of 2025, the loan matured and the borrower could not pay the balloon payment. The loan went into maturity default. The lender, a consortium of institutional investors holding CMBS bonds backed by this loan, faced a choice: foreclose and own a vacant office building in suburban Seattle that nobody wants, or extend the maturity and hope the borrower finds a tenant. They chose to extend. They have now extended twice. Each extension requires the borrower to make a principal curtailment payment, which is a partial paydown of the loan. But eventually, the borrower will run out of cash to make curtailment payments, and then the lender will have no choice but to foreclose. When that happens, the lender will try to sell the building. But who will buy it? At what price? If the building cannot be leased as office space, its value is essentially land value minus demolition costs. In suburban Seattle, that might be $30 to $40 million. But the lender is owed $304 million. That is a loss of $264 million, or 87% of the original loan balance. Multiply that loss across thousands of buildings in hundreds of cities, and you start to understand the scale of the wealth destruction underway. Trillions of dollars of real estate value are evaporating, and every dollar of loss flows through to someone's balance sheet. Pension funds that invested in CMBS, insurance companies that hold commercial mortgages, regional banks that lent to local developers. They are all taking losses, and those losses reduce their ability to lend, to invest, to support the broader economy. This is how a commercial real estate crisis becomes an economic crisis. It is not just about empty buildings. It is about the destruction of the financial system's capacity to function. But the vacancy death spiral does not stop at office buildings. It metastasizes into retail, hospitality, and residential real estate. Because cities are ecosystems. When one sector dies, the entire ecosystem collapses. Let me walk you through the cascade of failures. Office workers are the economic engine of downtown. They eat at restaurants. They shop at stores. They use hotels for business travel. They create demand for apartments and condos within walking distance of their offices. When office workers disappear, every business that depends on them dies. In downtown San Francisco, the restaurant and retail apocalypse is already well underway. Westfield San Francisco Center, the iconic shopping mall anchored by Nordstrom, is in foreclosure. Nordstrom closed its flagship store in mid-2023. Other retailers followed. The mall's owner stopped making mortgage payments. The lender foreclosed. Today, the building sits largely empty, a monument to failed retail. Walk down Market Street in San Francisco, and you will see boarded-up storefronts every 50 feet. National chains like Walgreens, CVS, and Whole Foods have closed multiple locations due to retail theft and lack of foot traffic. Local restaurants that survived the pandemic lockdowns are now closing due to the absence of lunch crowds. One restaurant owner told a local reporter, "I used to serve 300 lunches a day to office workers. Now I serve 30. I cannot pay rent on 30 lunches." Hotels are collapsing too. Downtown San Francisco hotel occupancy rates have fallen to historic lows. Many properties have converted to homeless shelters or transitional housing under government contracts, because those contracts provide guaranteed revenue, even if the economics are terrible. But converting hotels to homeless housing creates a vicious cycle. Visible homelessness increases, which makes tourists avoid the area, which reduces hotel demand further, which forces more hotels to convert to shelters. This is the doom loop. Now let us talk about residential real estate. San Francisco home values have declined significantly. The average home price in San Francisco as of late 2025 is approximately $1,300,000, down roughly 5 to 10% from peak. But that average masks huge disparities. Luxury condos in high-rise towers downtown have lost 20 to 30% of their value because buyers do not want to live in a dead downtown surrounded by vacant offices and boarded-up retail. And here is the scariest part for residential owners. Property tax revenues are collapsing. When commercial buildings lose value, their property tax assessments drop. When hotels close, property tax revenue disappears. Cities like San Francisco rely heavily on property taxes to fund police, fire, schools, and infrastructure. As property tax revenue craters, cities face a choice: cut services or raise tax rates on remaining properties. They will raise rates. They always do. So residential homeowners will see their property tax bills increase even as their home values decline. This is the definition of a doom loop. You own an asset that is falling in value while the cost of owning that asset is rising. At some point, rational homeowners walk away. They sell a loss and move to Austin, Phoenix, Miami, or any city where downtown is alive and taxes are reasonable. This is exactly what has been happening. Domestic migration data shows that San Francisco, New York, and Chicago have all experienced significant net outflows of residents over the past 5 years. People are voting with their feet. They are abandoning these cities. And every person who leaves takes their income tax, their sales tax, and their property tax with them. The result is a fiscal crisis at the municipal level. Cities cannot cut spending fast enough to match revenue declines. They cannot borrow because credit markets are closed to distressed municipalities. And they cannot raise taxes high enough without accelerating the exodus. So they enter a managed decline. They stop maintaining roads. They stop funding parks. They reduce police and fire staffing. Quality of life deteriorates, and the doom loop accelerates. Now I need to address the issue that nobody in polite society wants to discuss. Crime. Because crime is both a cause and an effect of urban collapse. It is the accelerant that turns a recession into a death spiral. Chicago is the clearest example of this dynamic. The city's murder rate is 5 times higher than New York's and 3 times higher than Los Angeles. That is not anecdotal. That is FBI data. In 2025, Chicago recorded over 650 homicides. New York, with more than 3 times the population, recorded fewer than 400. But raw homicide numbers do not capture the psychological impact of visible disorder. What drives businesses and residents away is not just murder. It is carjackings, smash and grab robberies, open-air drug use, aggressive panhandling, and retail theft. These crimes create an atmosphere of lawlessness that makes people feel unsafe even if they personally are never victimized. Walgreens cited crime as a major factor in its decision to leave downtown Chicago. The company has closed dozens of stores across the city due to unsustainable theft losses. Employees reported being assaulted, threatened, and robbed. Customers stopped coming because they did not feel safe. At some point, the economics of operating in a high-crime environment become impossible. And the response from political leadership has been inadequate at best and counterproductive at worst. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson cut millions of dollars from police overtime budgets while championing violence interrupters instead of traditional law enforcement. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the Safety Act, which abolished cash bail and allowed repeat offenders back on the streets within days of arrest. The result is a revolving door justice system where criminals face no consequences and victims have no recourse. Downtown retailers have responded by boarding up windows, hiring private security, and shortening store hours. But private security is expensive. Small businesses cannot afford it, so they close. And when small businesses close, street-level vitality disappears. Empty storefronts attract vandalism and squatters. The visual environment degrades, and the perception of danger increases even if actual crime rates stabilize. This is the doom loop again. Crime drives businesses away. Business closures create empty streets. Empty streets enable more crime. More crime drives more businesses away. The loop continues until downtown is a no-go zone after dark. San Francisco has a similar problem, though it manifests differently. The city's permissive approach to drug use has created open-air drug markets in the Tenderloin District and other downtown areas. Visitors and office workers are confronted with visible drug use, unconscious addicts on sidewalks, and aggressive behavior from mentally ill individuals. This creates an atmosphere of disorder that repels businesses and residents. Tech companies that once championed San Francisco as a hub of innovation are now telling employees they can work remotely permanently. Why force workers to commute to an office in a neighborhood where they step over needles and human feces on the sidewalk? It is not a humane or productive work environment. So companies let workers stay home, and downtown dies a little more each day. New York has managed this issue better than San Francisco and Chicago, but it is not immune. Subway crime, particularly assaults and thefts on trains and platforms, has created fear among commuters. The perception of danger has driven many former transit riders to work from home or drive, which reduces subway ridership, which reduces fare revenue, which forces the MTA to cut service, which makes subways less convenient, which drives more people away. Another doom loop. The common thread across all three cities is the failure of political leadership to prioritize public safety. Leaders have treated crime as a symptom of inequality rather than as a standalone crisis requiring aggressive law enforcement. The result is that businesses, residents, and investors have lost confidence in the ability of these cities to provide basic order and safety. And once confidence is lost, it is almost impossible to regain. We have covered the vacancy crisis, the debt maturity bomb, the retail collapse, and the crime spiral. Now I need to tell you what happens next, because we are not looking backward at a crisis that already occurred. We are looking forward at a crisis that is accelerating toward critical mass in the next 36 hours. As we enter the week of January 20th, 2026, we are facing the most dangerous period in the history of American urban finance. This is the week when the first major wave of commercial real estate loan maturities hits the market. This is the week when extend and pretend finally ends. And this is the week when banks will be forced to make choices they have been avoiding for 3 years. Let me walk you through the timeline of what I believe will unfold. Right now, over the next 12 hours, borrowers are making final desperate phone calls to lenders. They are begging for one more extension, one more 3-month grace period, one more chance to find a tenant, to refinance, to sell. Some will succeed. Most will not. Lenders have reached their breaking point. Regulatory pressure from the Federal Reserve and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is forcing banks to stop extending impaired loans. Examiners are showing up and telling banks, you have to recognize these losses. You cannot pretend this building is worth $150 million when it is really worth $80 million. Mark it down, or we will downgrade your capital rating. So lenders are hardening. They are telling borrowers, you have until February 1st to refinance. If you cannot refinance, we are starting foreclosure proceedings. This is the final ultimatum, and thousands of borrowers are getting this ultimatum simultaneously. The result will be a wave of strategic defaults. Borrowers will do the math and realize they cannot refinance, they cannot sell, and they cannot inject enough equity to make the loan work. So they will walk away. They will stop making payments. They will hand the keys to the lender and file for bankruptcy. This is rational economic behavior when you're underwater on an asset that is declining in value. Once defaults start, foreclosures follow. Foreclosure is a legal process that takes time, typically 60 to 90 days. So the foreclosures we see in February and March will reflect defaults that happen this week, and the volume will be staggering. I predict we will see dozens of major office properties in San Francisco, New York, and Chicago enter foreclosure in the first quarter of 2026. Each foreclosure will generate headlines. Each headline will erode confidence. And confidence is the only thing holding the commercial real estate market together right now. When buildings go into foreclosure, property management companies stop paying vendors. Janitorial services get canceled. Security guards get laid off. Maintenance stops. Buildings begin to physically deteriorate. Remaining tenants panic and start looking for exit strategies. The death spiral accelerates. Lenders who foreclose will try to auction the properties. But auctions require buyers, and there are no buyers at current debt levels. Sophisticated investors like Blackstone, Brookfield, and Starwood have been sitting on the sidelines for 2 years waiting for prices to fall. They will lowball. They will offer 50 cents on the dollar. Lenders will refuse, and properties will sit in foreclosure limbo for months, generating zero income while property taxes and insurance accumulate. The real systemic danger is in the CMBS market. Remember, $266 billion of CMBS office debt matures in 2025 and 2026. When the underlying loans default, the CMBS bonds go into delinquency. And when CMBS bonds go delinquent, they get sold at massive discounts by institutional investors who cannot hold non-performing assets. This creates a price discovery crisis. What is a CMBS bond backed by a foreclosed office building in San Francisco really worth? Nobody knows, so investors assume the worst. They mark the bond down to 30 or 40 cents on the dollar. Every pension fund, insurance company, and foreign bank that holds these bonds takes enormous losses on their balance sheets. And here is the contagion mechanism. When large institutional investors take losses on CMBS, they reduce their allocations to all commercial real estate. They stop buying new CMBS issuance. They stop funding new loans. The entire market freezes. This is what happened in 2008. Credit markets seized up. Nobody would lend, and the economy collapsed. I believe we are 90 to 120 days away from a full CMBS market freeze. And when that happens, the Federal Reserve will have no choice but to intervene with a massive quantitative easing program targeted at commercial real estate. They will buy hundreds of billions of dollars of distressed CMBS to create a floor onto the market. They did it in 2008. They will do it again. But this bailout will be inflationary. The Fed will print money to buy toxic debt. That money will enter the financial system. Asset prices will rise. Consumer prices will rise. And the dollar will weaken. This is the hidden cost of bailing out failed commercial real estate. Everyone who holds dollars will pay the price through inflation. We are witnessing the greatest urban wealth destruction event in modern American history. Three of the most iconic cities in the nation, San Francisco, New York, and Chicago, are hollowing out from the inside. Their downtowns are becoming ghost towns. Their office towers are monuments to a bygone era, and their financial systems are on the verge of collapse. This is not a temporary disruption. This is a permanent restructuring of how and where Americans work and live. Remote work has broken the urban office model. Companies have realized they do not need expensive downtown real estate to be productive. Workers have realized they do not want to commute to dangerous, depressing city centers. And investors have realized that office buildings are obsolete assets in a post-pandemic economy. The consequences will reverberate for decades. Cities will shrink. Tax bases will collapse. Municipal services will degrade. Crime will increase. And the doom loop will continue until cities hit a new equilibrium at a much lower level of economic activity and population density. But here's what I want you to understand. This crisis creates opportunities. When assets are mispriced, fortunes are made. When markets collapse, the smart money buys at the bottom. And we are approaching the bottom. If you're an investor with capital, start identifying distressed office properties in prime locations that can be converted to residential, life science, or mixed use. These properties will trade at 20 to 30 cents on the dollar over the next 18 months. Buy them, convert them, and hold them for the next cycle. If you're a business owner, consider relocating to emerging cities like Austin, Nashville, Phoenix, or Miami. These cities have functional downtowns, reasonable taxes, and growing populations. The talent you need is moving there. The capital you need is flowing there. And the quality of life is better. If you're a worker, negotiate permanent remote work or relocate to a city with a future. Do not waste your life commuting to a dying downtown out of loyalty to a company or a city that does not prioritize your safety and well-being. And if you are a taxpayer in San Francisco, New York, or Chicago, demand accountability from your political leaders. Demand they prioritize public safety. Demand they cut spending to match declining revenues. Demand they stop pretending downtown will magically recover if they just wait long enough. It will not recover. It is over. The era of the dense urban office core is ending. The era of distributed work, Sunbelt growth, and urban decline is beginning. The 36-hour countdown to financial reckoning is underway. The debt maturity wall is here. The foreclosure tsunami is starting. And the CMBS meltdown is imminent. This is not fear-mongering. This is mathematics. This is reality. And reality does not care about your feelings or your nostalgia for what cities used to be. Prepare accordingly. Position your capital. Protect your family. And understand that we are living through a historic transformation of American urban life. This has been Alexander Cross. The warning has been delivered. The data has been presented. The timeline has been laid out. What you do with this information is up to you. Share this video, like and subscribe, and may you be on the right side of this trade when the dust settles. The countdown is ticking. The buildings are empty. And the reckoning is here.